Hello, Brooklyn. My name is Julia Weeks, and I'm your host of Navy Yard Neighbor BK. We have a great show for you today. We have lifelong Brooklynite Asia Worthy Davis on the program. She is Executive Director of Public Affairs at the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner. So we are looking forward to hearing from her and how things are going during the coronavirus over at the Medical Examiner's Office. So I would like to bring you on Asia. Hi there. Welcome to the
Hi,
show.
how are you? So happy to be with you today. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on. We really appreciate you spending Sunday evening with us. It was just pouring down rain over here at the Navy Yard. You too, huh?
Yeah, we heard it, and I was going to originally talk from the stoop because it's where I like to do my best talking. And then we heard the thunder.
And then it was like, retreat!
Yeah.
There's a beautiful rainbow that came after the thunderstorm, so we were happy to get a glimpse of that from our window. But if you could kind of start by telling us a little bit about yourself, I know our audience would love to hear.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in the neighborhood. I grew up in the Fort Greene, Clinton Hill neighborhood. I still live here, obviously, with my husband and our many dogs. Growing up here was kind of an amazing upbringing. A lot of artists, a lot of city workers, firefighters, cops, nurses, teachers, people who are very involved in arts and social justice and kind of the intersection of all of those things with politics. And I think I'm very much the product of that upbringing.
That's amazing. How many how many dogs do you guys have? We're a big fan of dogs.
Right now we have 5. 2 are on their way to other families, and Mama and her 2 sons are going to stay.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm sure maybe if we haven't already, we'll see you around the neighborhood walking dogs.
People call us the dog family with all the brown.
That's not a bad thing. Certainly in this time, dogs bring us so much joy and love, and we could all use a little bit more of that. So, yeah. Well, I mean, we can just start by saying, you have been in the neighborhood for so long. So how have you kind of seen the neighborhood change? And I mean, I just can't imagine even the last, 4 or 5 years. I'm sure the neighborhood has really changed since me and my partner moved in.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there are things that have changed dramatically since I was a kid. My parents came here in kind of the early 90s, and they would say they were kind of the wave of, young Black professionals who were buying the brownstones and townhouses and rehabbing. And, I think this is a community where you can kind of always tell, who the incoming residents are by who's purchasing those homes and making those changes. My childhood was very much, all of the people that I was talking about, city workers, artists, business owners, Spike Lee parties and Black entertainers at the neighborhood diner. That was kind of my childhood and what I grew up here in Fort Greene. And I think those elements of it are still very much who we are today, right? That's still, the places have gotten fancier. The diner has gotten much fancier, but it still feels very much weirdly. I know that's not often the answer that people are expecting to hear, but it still feels very much like the Fort Greene that I grew up in.
I love to hear that, and I think that's why probably so many people flock here, right? People from all over the world. I'm originally from Memphis and have lived in this area, kind of Fort Greene, Clinton Hill. It's, when people ask us where we live, I always say, oh, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, because I really don't know, what to call this area. I think now people call it Wallabout because of the Wallabout Bay.
It was Wallabout when I was working in the local neighborhood. It was Wallabout. And then the Navy Yard finally came about. It was I would say Wallabout's definitely people who are more into kind of the history of it.
And I love it. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I just love it so much here. There's so much history. I mean, just, walking outside, walking across the street, and then even, walking up Vanderbilt kind of towards Myrtle Avenue. All of those houses, I think, are protected houses where, I guess I don't know if it's the admirals, but people in the Navy used to live there. I think it's just
admiral row houses.
Yeah, such a fascinating neighborhood. So I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on just community here in Fort Greene, kind of now, and what community means to you. And do you see much of that in Fort Greene during these times?
Well, this community, having lived in it, grown up in it, and then worked in it, frankly, for a number of years, it feels like home. I feel, very comfortable in the local churches. When I attend, I feel very comfortable in, the restaurants. I feel very comfortable in the park. I mean, I walk by, the local park, and I remember being there as a child, my own scraped knees. You know what I mean? It feels like home. And I think, I have come to a place right now where I'm really interested in kind of getting more involved in the local goings on in a way that I was a number of years ago. And, the more that I'm stepping my foot back into that, the more familiar it feels.
I love that. I think that that's a wonderful answer. And kind of to transition on that note, I mean, I know you've just done so much in the community, in Brooklyn and Manhattan. You worked with Tish James. I would love it if you could just tell us a little bit about what kind of work did you do with her on the New York City development, and just kind of speak to that.
Yeah, I came to Tish. I'd worked on some congressional campaigns in Connecticut. I'd also worked with Hillary Clinton's team and Mike Bloomberg's team. So I had a good understanding of kind of, organizing on a certain level and communications and stuff like that. But I think really organizing at a grassroots level, negotiations, a lot of the stuff that's relevant in a community like ours, where, there has been fairly rapid development in a fairly short period of time, was all stuff I definitely learned at the, sitting next to Tish James, working for her. I learned all these things, and it was incredible to learn in your own community, to be involved in, some of the negotiations, the community benefits agreements, the, affordable housing agreements, various things, affecting your own neighborhood and neighbors, was an incredible experience, an incredible period of my life. Tish was really active in the negotiation of the Atlantic Yards, what was at that point in time the Atlantic Yards Community Benefits Agreement. That happened before, I came to work for her, but a lot of that follow-up stuff I was involved in, and I saw a lot of those principles around ensuring that you take care of your own community and your own residents, and you prioritize them in any negotiation. I saw her do that with Admiral's Row, which ultimately obviously became the extension of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and other kinds of commercial developments. I got to see what those conversations look like, and frankly, what you have to bring to the table to leave with something substantial. I got to see that up close.
That's incredible. And did that kind of make it a seamless transition for you to work kind of with the Blasio administration now? How did you kind of make that transition?
I was with Tish up until the public advocate's office. Continued to learn a lot. Was a great experience. Had the opportunity to go work with the administration and NYCHA at the time, public housing. It was, as you know, here in downtown Brooklyn, we have a lot of public housing compared to other areas of the borough. So I understood a lot about organizing within public housing. Going to work, for NYCHA was also kind of an experience and learning, how to meet the needs of, NYCHA is a city within a city, right? So a lot was learned in that experience. And I think I got to a place where I was able to communicate a lot of the policies that were happening pretty well as part of the team that I was with. And it was an easy transition into working, in the mayor's office at that point in time, because I understood a lot about social services and public housing and public services and the kinds of things that are really important to this particular administration.
Sure, and telling those stories, I think, is just so important. maybe about a month ago, we had Shaquana Boykin on the program.
Yeah, I've heard about her win. That's incredible.
Yeah, she's really, really remarkable. So, we love her so much. And I briefly told you, I think, on Twitter that we participated in this cleanup yesterday under the BQE with some neighbors, and I'm not quite sure which particular neighbor, but some people organized, and this was the second straight week in a row that they did it, where we just met from 10 to noon, 10 to 12:30. There were about 20 people, and we just brought our own rakes. We brought our own garbage cans. I think the sanitation department provided trash bags, but we just swept and raked and cleaned up all the crap under the BQE. And as you know, there is just so much.
There's just so much.
But everybody seems so appreciative. I mean, the people who live, in Walt Whitman just kept saying, thank you, thank you. And Shaquana wanted to try and do maybe another one later in the summer where we could get some of the residents to come out and help participate. So I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, I would definitely love to be involved in that. I've been kind of quarantined, working from home, like many New Yorkers. But yeah, there are many times where I've walked past there where I said, "Oh my God, why is it so trashy?" Into the
It's so trashy.
As someone who lives right next to it, I would love to be involved in that.
That's awesome. I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, you really see like community at its finest, right? I mean, it literally took like 24 people, and just the amount of work that we accomplished in a few hours, which it really is breathtaking. We walk by today and we're like, oh, it looks so much better.
So much, it really changes kind of your energy too when you walk past something and it's not looking its best.
Yeah, it does. It makes all the difference. It definitely does.
Yeah.
But we know, I mean, certainly people have been quarantined and working from home, and I know coronavirus is spiking pretty much all around the country now. So I mean, how is it at the medical your office? You must be swamped all the time.
We have. I mean, obviously the numbers have gone down significantly here in New York City. I think, I work with probably the most talented death investigators, experts in death management in the world. They go talk about how you handle crises like this all the time to organizations, to other countries, to other folks. And, there were so many lessons that OCME learned as an agency through 9/11. And I think, because of, the fairly narrow role that we play, we've been able to kind of study that in the years since and learn how to get better. What happens if there is a pandemic? What happens if there's, unfortunately, a terrorist attack? How do we handle some kind of mass incident? And, it's not the most pleasant thought, obviously, but I think, the reason that this agency was able to, meet that challenge and address, the large number of deaths that we had in a way that wasn't like, didn't cause extreme public alarm is because of that preparedness. So, I always say we are the kind of invisible part of the criminal justice system, the scientists who work in it. Obviously not law enforcement, obviously not prosecutors, but it's important work. It's important work to the criminal justice system, and it's important work, when it's needed. And I think I'm really proud of what this agency did, incredibly proud. It's probably, of all the work that I've done with this administration, what I'm most proud of. And I the timepiece and the 60 Minutes says it way better than I can.
Yeah, I'd love to bring some of those articles up and show folks, because certainly it was national news and still is. And I understand why, Cuomo doesn't necessarily want folks coming in, from other places once we've got it under control, right?
Right.
It makes sense. So let me just share my screen, and I'm going to show folks this 60 Minutes piece. You can see the title, New York City overwhelmed by coronavirus fatalities as plasma treatment brings hope. But I mean, we live in the neighborhood, and we even saw these trucks, these trailers outside Brooklyn Hospital. I mean, can you kind of talk about that, and how was that? I mean, obviously just because there were so many people who were dying.
Yeah.
How did you get that idea to bring those trucks in, and kind of the thought behind that?
So we have a pandemic response plan, again, kind of developed in the aftermath of 9/11 that kind of guides, in a very rough sense, what we are prepared to do and what we have the capabilities to do in the event of a disaster of some sort. Part of that was, very clearly we have around 900 public slots for bodies in city morgues. That's not counting what's in hospitals. That's just our facilities. Hospital morgues tend to be pretty small. So, one of the main parts that the plan deals with is where do you put, a large number of bodies. And this was the solution that was created to assist hospitals who, again, have very tiny morgue spaces, but also so there can be a centralized place where we can go and collect as needed, where funeral directors can go and collect as needed. So there were, the trucks have been gone for a few weeks. Now we're collecting mostly at our central spaces, but it was a massive operation that we received support from the National Guard and other parts of the military, as well as a number of employees from the health department were lent to our agency to assist in this. It was a ginormous effort.
I can't even imagine. I mean, it just, is mind blowing and boggling when you see those pictures and just hear the numbers of the amount of people and New Yorkers that we lost. My heart breaks every time. But for those people who don't really know what the Office of the Medical Examiner does, can you kind of break it down? I mean, obviously you do that work, which is very, very important. But if you could explain a little bit more what you guys do.
So the Office of Chief Medical Examiner in New York City is the agency led by the Chief Medical Examiner herself, responsible for medical investigations, which are effectively investigations and when someone dies that determines, how they die for purposes of, the criminal justice system and, whether it's a homicide, so on and so forth. We also run the largest public lab in North America, and probably the biggest staff. So we handle every single, rape kit, every, anything having to do with testing for a criminal case, burglary, shooting. We also do toxicology and all the kinds of things you would typically have as part of a medical investigation. So, while we don't typically deal, on a day-to-day basis with natural deaths, so to speak, like COVID deaths, they're natural deaths. The mortuary end of what we do, which is facilitating burials and, creating environments where people can be safely and humanely buried and or prepared to be buried, is all part of our role. And that's really what we did for the COVID crisis. We, facilitated places for the bodies to go. We taught hospitals how to load bodies in trucks. We built the shelving in the trucks. We created new protocols aside with the state and the funeral directors throughout our city. We kind of created a new system where something that is usually a much less packed process could still be facilitated with the amount of deaths that we were seeing. So, I mean, that's a real challenge. If you looked at what cities and other countries went through, there's always that question of what do we do with all these bodies? And I think our leadership, both the chief medical examiner and the mayor, were kind of very clear about the standard that they wanted to have here in New York City. And we met that, and it was incredible work.
I think that you really paved the way, for cities moving forward too. I mean, Arizona, California, Texas, hopefully it doesn't, Florida get to those levels, but you certainly have created a map for states to follow. For people who don't know, about those trucks, could you talk a little bit about the shelving? Because the trucks
they are regular refrigerated trucks. They can go to around 30 degrees, which is what you would want for a truck serving that purpose. We developed in our own facilities shelving that allows up to 100 bodies to remain in the truck. The goal is, obviously to move the bodies out as quickly as you can so that families can, have their burial, have their cremation if possible. One thing our agency has offered is long-term storage because we understand that the funeral industry is a little backed up there. So we want to provide families with the peace of mind to know that, we will hold the body, we will preserve the body while you take the time to make the arrangements you want to make. It takes a lot of resources, takes a lot of personnel to outfit hundreds of vans with specific type of shelving. A lot happened in a very short period of time. And we're happy to talk about it. Our leaders were just our deputy commissioner who ran the entire forensic operation was just recently speaking with, I think, the CDC about what happened here. So, we're sharing that expertise as much as we can and hoping that people can learn from it. And, that's what we have always done. So.
Absolutely. New York is always on the forefront of everything. I mean, health, wellness, you name it. I think that is so, so important. And kind of, obviously coronavirus happened, and then certainly, George Floyd and Black Lives Matter protests, and just kind of at this nexus in time. Can you speak a little bit about that? I mean, of course, the people who are dying, from coronavirus are people who live in Walt Whitman and Ingersoll. If you could speak to that, I think people would like to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess I'm not surprised to know that our neighborhood was kind of the backdrop for a lot of action, a lot of social justice action around Black lives. It seems very fitting that we would be where a lot of this is happening based on our history. I think, it's difficult. I think we're seeing a moment where people really want leadership that can speak very directly to their concerns. I think, here in New York City, in terms of COVID crisis, I mean, I personally, every time I turn on TV, every time I turn on the radio, I'm hearing from a public leader telling me, what I should be doing to keep myself safe, what I should be doing to keep my community safe. That's very meaningful, I think. But the reality is, of course, there are people who, are service workers, are essential workers. They have to go out every day. It's real fear. I mean, I've walked into the morgue and the temporary morgues many times since COVID, and I felt fear, and I work in a morgue. So I'm not prone to squeamishness around those things, but it's a very real fear. And frankly, it's not, it's going to affect everything from our education system to everything else that we take for granted will continue to run normally in New York City and everywhere else, every other city that's being affected. And yeah.
What can we do as a community? I mean, just to, assure that things don't happen, that people get the care that they need, that we have the testing. How can we be better allies and really stand, with our community?
Well, I think the public hospitals are the health and hospitals. Our public hospital system is doing antibody and COVID testing. So I think if you're inclined to go over to Brooklyn Hospital, and that's where you usually go, maybe consider going to Cumberland, which is a public hospital, and getting that testing done there. That's one thing you can do on top of wearing your mask and trying not to go outside if you don't need to. Also, I mean, I would, this may be happening, I'm not sure, but I would love to see some kind of effort to get, seniors in public housing their groceries or like the essential things that they need. And again, I mean, I'm going to try to touch base with Shaquana because I'm sure she's doing amazing work and that may be actually happening right now. But I think that has been the biggest concern. And I've read about, some groups that are doing that in like the Prospect Heights, Crown Heights community. And it very much appeals to me because I think, fundamentally, and I'm a girl that works at the morgue, so maybe I'm being a little darker than is cool. But fundamentally, until there is a vaccine, this could come in waves. You know what I mean? We're going to try to bring it down in New York City. I think we've done incredible work here. And our leadership is fairly clear about, what we need to do. But yeah, I think the most we can keep people off the streets, which is like a terrible thing to say in the middle of the summer, is still the best thing you could do, especially if you're elderly, especially if you're, medically compromised.
It's so true. We have the executive director, Judy Willig, who works at Heights and Hills, which is one of the oldest nonprofits in Brooklyn that really helps seniors. So that deals with making the quality of senior lives better. So they have programs. I'm a friendly visitor in their program normally, where I have a friend that I go and visit who lives in Clinton Hill. She's about a 10-minute walk away. And I just haven't been able to see her this whole entire time of the pandemic. I did see her once, but it was just kind of, from the hallway, and dropped off a little card for her and a piece of pie because it was Mother's Day. But brought her a mask because wasn't sure she had those. But when Judy came on, she said that they are also taking volunteers for delivering groceries and just some of that stuff, because it is so important that, seniors, like you're saying, stay home because they are one of the most susceptible groups of people. So I definitely miss our weekly visits, but, it's not worth, being asymptomatic and not knowing it and then passing it on to her. So I think that the work that Heights and Hills is doing is very important too. Definitely. I read recently, though, I don't know if you're familiar with this, about they used to do the 7 p.m. clap all over the city. And so now in Clinton Hill, there's a particular block. I think it's St. James and Green. Have you seen any of that? Or
I mean, I definitely hear it. My tenants clap. And so my dogs know at 7 now, they're used to it. They're like, yay, they're part of it. Yeah, I have gone out there and people are, the banging of the pots. It's wonderful. I mean, we're a community with a public hospital and a private hospital, and, we want to support our medical workers, and, I think it's really nice. My dogs aren't a fan, but I think it's
right. Neither is ours. So we'll just quickly show a couple of these other articles, and we can just, there's stuff that we touched on, but just share with people so they can look it up. I thought this was a great article that Time did.
Oh yeah, that was an incredible piece.
And just an amazing photo, of the National Guard. But I thought this was such a powerful piece that they did, so I would recommend everybody.
I got to ride around with those guys when we were working on that Time piece and kind of just talk to them about what their experiences are. The team that I was with were all New York, I think with one exception. I was with a 4-person team and 2 of them were from the Bronx. So we just it felt like just hanging out with some New Yorkers that day. But it was my first time ever, having the experience of, going to homes and removing the bodies and just seeing how they interacted, and not just the professionalism that they had as, obviously military workers, but, the sensitivity that they brought to the situation too. They understood that every time they walked into somebody's house, this is somebody who, just lost a loved one. And obviously the pandemic, the knowledge that, this loved one may have had this illness, and that they could possibly have this illness was kind of a constant reality. So, they were there to provide comfort in, any kind of emotional situation, which is, a big part of this work, frankly, because we are interacting with people at the worst times of their lives.
I can't even imagine. I mean, it just takes a special type of person like yourself, like them, to be able to do that, to do the work, to be there for other people. And I guess, we'll kind of end on like, what kind of routines do you have for self-care? How are you taking care of yourself during this difficult time?
Believe it or not, that's a question that the chief medical examiner asked me before she hired me. She said, this is a tough environment. And do you have something? Do you do something?
You have a few things.
I watch true crime TV. Yeah, I mean, I've went from politics to pretty tough crisis communications for some pretty tough city agencies. So I've always had to be able to turn it off and go to my happy place. Sometimes that's some science fiction TV. Sometimes that's sitting in my backyard with my dogs. We are yard gardeners, so we grow, some of our own vegetables in our own backyard. So that's a source of peace and joy for me. And my neighborhood and my community. I love to brunch. When we're in non-quarantine times, I love to go out and find out what's happening with my neighbors and what cool things are. There's always cool stuff happening in this community. So yeah, I mean, it's being in Brooklyn is a big part of my personal joy.
And you never thought about leaving, going anywhere else?
I left for college, and it was enough for me. I saw enough.
Home is where the heart is, that's for sure. And there's a lot of heart in this community. There's a lot of heart in Brooklyn, and we love it. We'd love to hear, how did you find out about us, about Navy Our Neighbor?
So I was, like I said, I've been trying to get a little bit more tapped into what's happening locally. I'm often in the Navy Yard area because I take the ferry to work, and I'm going to the 32nd to go to the morgue. That's how I get to work. So I'm always checking out what's happening. I am a Wegmans fanatic.
Same.
It's crazy. Like the day they opened, Tish actually did the opening there.
Really? No, we weren't that early, so we missed her.
Yeah, I was there. I wasn't there physically here. I just heard that she did it, and I talked to her a little bit about it. But I'm very excited about the Wegmans. So I'm kind of always interested what's happening over there. A former colleague of mine is a VP over in the Brooklyn Navy Yard as well. So I see him and I kind of pick his brain about what's happening. So yeah, I came upon you guys just poking around about what's happening and who's talking about, what's being the development and kind of what's happening in the larger community.
That's awesome. Well, we're so happy that you came upon us, and we can't wait to see you IRL now. That'll be the next step, walking the dog. So can you kind of tell people how they can find you? We're flashing your Twitter.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm not on too much else. I am, like I said, I'm getting a little bit more involved in what's happening with the community, but I'm, usually involved in something happening with the administration. So you can see me in many newspapers. Things.
Great. And in the meantime, you can follow Asia at Asia Worthy Davis on Twitter. But thank you so much for just coming and for spending a few minutes with us, and just for all the work that you've been doing. It is appreciated, and we just thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye.